Good afternoon, everyone. It's nice to see all of you on my very, very busy Zoom screen. I have a computer that now shows me 48 at a time, so it's quite exciting to see all of you. My name is Andrew Kushner, and I am Executive Vice President for Donor Relations at the Jewish Federation. I know you're all here to see Jason Blum and Scott Feingart and listen in on a conversation about changes in Hollywood. But first, I wanted to give you a little update on the work of the Jewish Federation. And let me start by acknowledging what I think all of you are probably feeling, which is this is a very complicated and difficult time for the Jewish community. We're going through a lot right now, and it's wonderful to be together as a community, gathering even virtually today. The feeling of community on this call is lovely, and it's important. Our federation has been around for over 110 years, and we always address the community's biggest challenges and opportunities. And that is the case no matter what the year and no matter what the season. And right now we're in a season of great difficulty. We are intensely focused on addressing the problem of anti-Semitism in our community. The incident that happened last week at the sushi restaurant that I am sure all of you heard about has us extremely concerned. About 7 years ago, we started a major initiative called the Community Security Initiative, which works with law enforcement to make sure that all Jewish institutions in Los Angeles are secure and connected to to everything that they can possibly have in order to stay strong. Last week, some of you might have been on a call that we did where we provided the community with information about less than 48 hours after the incident. We had the city attorney, the FBI, we had local police, we had elected officials. We are on top of community security, and we are very focused. Tomorrow, we're going to put this into the chat. There is an event called the Day of Action Against Anti-Semitism that is an online national effort for the whole Jewish community of North America to come together with allies to talk about anti-Semitism and the things that people can do to address it. So we invite you to join that. Earlier today, I already heard that there were about 15,000 RSVPs for that. It will be basically a national summit on all of the things that you can do, we can all do to respond to anti-Semitism. The Federation and essentially our trade associations, Jewish federations in North America, are all working together on making that a great program that is very important. Our hearts and minds are also in Israel right now. The war with Hamas was obviously incredibly difficult and brought trauma to the entire country, as nearly 5,000 rockets were fired at civilian centers. Our CEO, Jay Sanderson, and the chair of one of our major initiatives, the Community Engagement Initiative, CC Filer, are both in Israel right now as we speak, on the ground, meeting with partners, trying to understand what is happening, how communities are dealing with it, and they're going to come back and help us figure out what we can do about it. One thing we have made a major investment in that is a core part of our work is we partner with an organization called the Israeli Trauma Coalition, and they work on community resilience throughout the country in good times and challenging times. And I know today, Jay was meeting with them, learning about the work they're doing right now to help families deal with the trauma within the families over the time that they were so stressed out during the week of war. So it's a very important part of who we are and what we do. And then lastly, it seems with all the news coming at us so fast, almost to have been over, but it's really not. We are still dealing with the impacts of the COVID pandemic. Our federation pivoted last year and launched a number of new initiatives to make sure that we were able to take care of the community. We brought food to people who had previously been able to go to food banks. We brought people into people's homes to make sure that they could take care of people who were struggling in the times that we were going through. We supported institutions in the community as they had to buy plexiglass and do all of the things necessary to reopen safely. We really are blessed at the Federation that we're able to do all of these things because of a wide network of people who invest in us and support us. And thank you for putting into the chat information about all of the professional networks and ways that you can support the Federation's work. This is a grouping of the professional networks, all of which come together and from which come many of our most important donors. Let me highlight just two donors real quickly. One is Stephen Nichols, who I believe is on this call, who helped us found our JTech network program. And the second one is City National Bank, which is the sponsor of all of our business networks together. It is now my pleasure, continuing the theme of business networks, to turn the program over to Katie Goldsmith. Katie works at Amazon Studios. She is a Federation board member and is the chair of our Entertainment, Media, and Communications Network, and is one of the leaders that's really helping the Federation see its way through these very difficult and challenging times. Katie, take it away.
All right, thank you so much, Andrew. I could not be more excited to welcome my friend Jason Blum here today. He really needs no introduction as one of the most prolific people in Hollywood today. You likely know him as the King of Horror, the founder and CEO of Blumhouse, who pioneered the high-quality micro-budget film model, which seemingly everyone has tried and failed to replicate. Jason has produced iconic genre-defining franchises like Halloween, Paranormal Activity, Insidious, and The Purge. His recent take on The Invisible Man grossed over $143 million. He does not stop at movies. He's created content for every streamer and studio in town today, including HBO, Netflix, Hulu, and Amazon's recent Welcome to the Blumhouse. He is a 3-time Academy Award nominee, 2-time Emmy Award winner, 2-time Peabody Award winner, and he's on the Time 100 list. I don't think we could find anyone who could better speak to today's continually evolving entertainment landscape. Jason will be joined by The Hollywood Reporter's very accomplished awards columnist, Scott Feingart. Welcome.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Katie, and everyone for having us, and great to speak with you, Jason. Thank you for making the time. And I figured that we will talk about the way the business is changing in many ways, especially this week. There have been some pretty tremendous changes, but I wanted to first go through a bit of your story if we can. So I guess just to start at the very beginning, can you share with our viewers, where were you born and raised, and what did your folks do for a living?
Sure. I was born actually in Los Angeles. I moved to New York when I was very young. My dad was an art dealer. He had a gallery in LA actually called the Ferris Gallery, which is my middle name. Gave Warhol his first West Coast show. He showed the soup cans there at the Ferris Gallery. And my mother was an art historian. They're both still alive. My mom was a professor of art history. She taught here in LA. She taught at Riverside. And on the East Coast, she spent most of her time teaching at SUNY Purchase. She's retired now. But I definitely grew up with artists and in the arts, and with 2 parents who were in the arts. And, had I not had those parents, I probably would have been doing something else. What do you want me to do? You want me to go through my—
No. I'm gonna walk it through it with you. That's great for
okay,
that
sure.
answer.
Okay, great.
So I guess, I know that you eventually went off to Vassar, but before that, if you can think back to your adolescence, and there may be people at that stage who are watching or listening or whatever, I'm just curious, do you remember what your interests and passions were as a kid?
Sure, I definitely do. I've actually been thinking a lot about my adolescence because I just read this great book, which I would highly recommend to all of you fellow Zoomers out there, called Notes on a Silencing. And it's by a woman named Lacey Crawford. I met her the other day, and it's about her experience at St. Paul's. Not a good experience, but I've been thinking a lot about my adolescence because I went to boarding school as well. I went to a school called Taft. Before that, I went to public school outside of New York City. I grew up in a little town called Dobbs Ferry. During the week, on the weekends, I was in the city with my dad. And when I was a kid, through high school and then into college, I was always kind of an oddball. I always was I went in and out of, like, when I was a freshman in high school, I was just a loser, like straight up. I was the kid the kid who, everybody made fun of. Now, I wasn't always like that all the way through. By the time I was a senior, being weird was actually cool. So I was actually kind of cool when I was a senior, but I definitely was always, I liked kind of weird things. And I think that had a lot to do with my parents. Most people's dads wasn't an art dealer. And, and so, I had pictures of modern art on my wall at Taft, and in 1988, that was pretty weird. So that's certainly one thing I
Yeah.
remember about it.
Well, so you eventually do go off to Vassar, and I guess I wondered what at that time you're thinking was going to be the sort of direction for your future. I had read at one point you were somewhat involved with acting. Was that also ever really a realistic goal?
I don't know. I think I liked aspects of it. I was not very good at it. At Vassar, I majored in filmmaking, and I almost minored in economics. That was very apropos of what I wound up doing. That was a great that was a great path to follow for a producer, economics and filmmaking.
Right.
I did act. I acted quite a bit in high school and quite a bit more in college, but I gave it up within 6 months after graduating. So I don't think my heart was really in it. I really found my passion in producing, which is kind of facilitating and being close to artists, but not doing the actual creating myself. And that I'm only linking this to you because you brought it up, but that was, my dad kind of modeled that behavior for me. So it was very familiar to me to, create a path and help artists realize their vision. That's what my father did too.
Absolutely. And I guess the first artist whose vision you helped to realize was your roommate, right? Can you tell a little bit about who that was?
Yeah. So my roommate was Noah Baumbach, who's a great writer director, and he was my roommate at college. And then after college, I spent a year in Chicago, where my primary activity was selling cable television. I sold cable TV door to door, which I always say I graduated from that to being a real estate agent in New York. I got my real estate license, and I always say those were the two things that best prepared me for a career in entertainment. Anyway, so I was roommates with Noah for a couple of years, and I was lucky when I was at college. I was aware of not much, but one thing I was very aware of was how unique it was to be 20 years old and not have to worry about, I was lucky my parents paid for my college, so I didn't have to worry about eating. I didn't have to worry about making money to live. And you could go to I went to it. I was very lucky to go to a fancy, well-endowed school. So they gave you a movie camera, or you could put on a play, or you could just do whatever you wanted to. You go play squash or whatever it's kind of amazing. And I was very lucky to realize at the time that this was very unique. And when I graduated, things would not be the same. So we would always make jokes about that. And Noah actually wrote a movie about it. And the movie was initially called Fifth Year. And it was about us. It was about 5 kids in college who made up reasons to stay in college for an extra year because they didn't want to go out, and they were terrified to graduate and go into the real world. And miraculously, he wrote that script. And I mean, it wasn't easy. It was 3 years and a million no's, but eventually that movie was made, and it was called Kicking and Screaming. It was made in the early 90s. And that was the first credit I ever got on a movie was Kicking and Screaming.
It's amazing. And you mentioned though that before, it's not like it was a direct route right from Vassar into producing. There were a few detours of other quite varied things. And I guess I wonder if you can just talk about how you then worked your way back into essentially producing with another guy who people will have heard of, named Ethan Hawke.
Oh, yes. So I had been, like I said, I did cable TV in Chicago. Then I was a real estate agent in New York. I was raising money for Kicking and Screaming. And miraculously, someone who I went to college with, her name was Catherine Kellner, and her father, Peter Kellner, was a silent investor in this little company called Arrow Entertainment. And Arrow Entertainment was run by a guy named Dennis Friedland. And coincidentally, Dennis and I had something in common, which is Dennis spent 50% of his time as a commercial real estate agent and 50% of his time in the movie business.
Wow.
Which was pretty funny.
What are the odds? Yeah.
And so we met. This friend put us in touch, and he read Kicking and Screaming. And every week, one summer, all summer long, we'd go up there. Noah and I would go up there and meet. We'd try and get him to do Kicking and Screaming. And finally, I'd actually applied to graduate school for producing. I'd applied to Peter Stark, and I'd applied to the other one, USC, whatever that one's called, producing program at UCLA, and the Peter Stark at USC. And I got into both. And my dad at that point was like, I paid for a Vassar. That's it. I'm done. So if you want to go to those schools, you got to take out a loan.
Right.
And I was prepared to do that. And as I was kind of about to go, Dennis called me whenever it was, I don't remember, maybe it was August or something, and said, look, I have good news and bad news. He said, the bad news is I'm not going to make Kicking and Screaming, but the good news is I'm going to give you a job, and I want you to do acquisitions for Arrow Entertainment, which I didn't have any idea what that meant, but it was a good salary. And so I decided to do it.
Right.
And while I was at Arrow, I continued to produce Kicking and Screaming, which hadn't gotten made yet. And I was told at one point, if you get Ethan Hawke in Kicking and Screaming, we'll make it. And so I stalked him he was doing the Seagull on Broadway, and I went to see the show. And then I accosted him afterwards and jammed Kicking and Screaming into his hands. And I continued to annoy him. I would pretend to be Chance meeting him when I had orchestrated it very, very specifically. And anyway, about 3 or 4 months later, Ethan said, he said later, he said, all of my friends at that time, they wanted to be writers or directors or actors. No one wanted to be a producer when they were 23 in New York at that time, right? And he was like, you're the only guy I know. And I got this theater company called Malaparte, and we need a producer. Do you want to produce it? And I was very, I'm not doing Kicking and Screaming, but I was very excited. And we met, we got to know each other very well. I produced this theater company called the Malaparte Theater Company, like from 93 to 95, something like that. And we became fast friends and great friends. And we've really been great friends ever since. We've done about 8 projects together. We just did The Good Lord Bird, actually, for which we just won a Peabody, which is our Katie. That's our 3rd Peabody. So please, you must correct that in the bio immediately.
That's amazing. And I think the first thing that you and Ethan, I believe, did do outside of the theater company was Hamlet 21 years ago, right? Maybe that would.
Yes. And I'm actually in Hamlet in the plane in first class. If you look in with the seats, I'm like sitting a row away from Ethan. And
your Hitchcockian cameo.
Hitchcockian cameo. That was Michael Amareda, and that was the first movie that he and I did together. And one of the first movies I executive produced that movie. One of the first credits I got, and the movie. I love that movie. It was an cool
such
movie.
a variety of stuff you've done with him, Sinister, The Purge, stuff that we'll talk about, but leading up, as you say, to The Good Lord Bird. But I want to ask you about what must have felt like going from, the minor leagues to the Yankees, basically, when you, in the heyday of Miramax, right? You go for, I think, about 5 years to Miramax. This is, if I have my dates right, 95 to 2000, something like that.
Yeah,
and
that's right.
That is within that period. English Patient and Shakespeare in Love win Best Picture. That's Dimension, right. The Bob side of things, starts really taking off with horror and the kinds of genre movies they were doing. And, there's a lot of obviously success there, but also for anyone there, I know it was a meat grinder of a place to work. And so I just wonder what you take away most, or when you look back at that 5-year stretch, what stands out the most to you?
I started working at Miramax, and my mother always says I have a real knack for starting something I get in way over my head really fast early. So when Dennis asked me to run or do acquisitions for Arrow Entertainment, I didn't know what that was. And I played a year of catch up. I've done that over and over. When I had a deal at Paramount, I'd never produced a studio movie, and suddenly I had a deal at Paramount. I had no idea what I was doing. And I really suffered from that when I was at Miramax. I got to Miramax, and to your point, I was working, I was like in the, I don't know, it's beyond quadruple A league or whatever. Yeah. And these were pros. They spent more on one movie than was our entire budget for 12 movies at Arrow. Mm-hmm. And I did it for a year and I got very depressed and I was really struggling. And I went to this great cognitive therapist in New York, a guy named Stephen Jacobson. I still remember his name. And he gave me this I wouldn't recommend the book now because it was meaningful to me at that time, but he gave me this great book for me at that moment called The Assertive Option. And I have a million memories from Miramax, but I remember with Stephen Jacobson, The Assertive Option, I was going to quit after 14 months. And this guy really helped me turn the experience around, and he did. And after 2 years, I figured it out, and I started having a lot of fun there. As strange as that may sound, it was super high pressure. It was super difficult. It was definitely borderline abusive. But there were also things about it that were great. And I made it 3 more years. I feel like I got out just in time. I feel like people who were at Miramax longer than 4 or 5 years, you could never recover. But I feel like I got out just in time to learn all the things that I did. And I would include those, like learn the things to do and not to do. And then I escaped with my my morality intact.
Right. And I just want to prompt you, if you don't mind, to share one amazing story I'd heard involved the movie that became The Others, that you had a globe-trotting experience with.
Yeah, that was great. I was at the Berlin Film Festival, and Harvey called me. He was in London, and I think he had been like at lunch or something with Anthony Minghella. Someone had tipped him off to the script called The Others. And he said, God, I haven't thought of this story. I haven't told this story in a long time. And he said, I want you to go buy this movie. And I had been at Miramax long enough to know what that meant. And what it meant when Harvey said that was the only way you could tell him you hadn't been able to get the movie is if you were in the presence of whoever was selling it, wherever that person was, and you got them on the phone and got them to say no to Harvey. Like that was it. Mm-hmm. So the people selling it was a group in Spain. And I called them. I was 28 years old, this like child from New York. But I was in Berlin. I said, I'm in Berlin. And I said, would like to get into deal with The Others. And they said, well, it's not for sale. And we're never selling it to Miramax ever. We've heard about Harvey and we've heard about everything there. We're never selling it. I said, okay, thank you very much. And I hung up the phone and I got a ticket to Spain. And I went to the one great thing one great thing about Miramax is at least they weren't cheap. Money was you had access to endless resources. Right. They asked you to do impossible things, but not for no money, thank God. So anyway, I was staying at the Ritz in Spain, which was very exciting, except I was in a very pressureful situation, so I wasn't able to enjoy it as much as I could have. And I got there at night. I slept. I woke up the next morning. And I went to the guy's office at 10 o'clock. Of course, it was Spain. It wasn't open. The woman said, "What are you doing here? No one will be here till noon." Right. So I sat in the office like a dentist's office. I sat in the office, and at noon, the guy walks in the door. I forget the guy's name, and he the woman says he won't see me, and I said, "Hello, I'm Jason Blum. I know you won't sell this, but I'm going to be fired unless I tell Harvey I'm here in this office with you right now." And you get on the phone. If you have to tell him no to your face and say, I've done everything. And if you want to do that, fine, then I'll keep my job, but otherwise no. And he said, all right, well, I'll go to lunch. He's like, I'd rather go to lunch with you than call Harvey. The long story short is we bought the movie. It took 3 weeks, but we bought the movie after that.
That's amazing. And just one last thing to kind of button up that chapter just before Blumhouse came about in 2000. Of course, everyone now looks back at that era differently than we did at the time. Like things have come to light that have been terrible. And I guess though, in your experience, I think like most people, we people knew Harvey was a jerk, right? A bully, but not necessarily much beyond that. And in your case, I read he would like the extent of it in terms of you having to deal with terrible stuff as well. Did he literally throw a cigarette at you?
He
A lit
did.
cigarette?
He did throw a cigarette at me, but you know, I was obviously, I'm still processing, you know, shocked and horrified about the sexual abuse stuff of Harvey. That was something that it- I was shocked when I heard it. It never crossed my mind that any of that was happening ever. But he was, you know, he never hit me or pushed me. But there was a movie called Run Lola Run, and we were in Toronto, and we were bidding on the movie, and the people selling the movie, it was a guy named Steve Saltzman. I don't know if he's in the business anymore. I'm still mad at that guy, Steve Saltzman. And anyway, we had basically a closed deal, and we ordered champagne, which was only relevant because when we sued them, we showed them the receipt for the champagne to prove that we had a closed deal. We ordered champagne, and anyway, they came out. I also made mistakes in the negotiation. Also, I made one big mistake. Anyway, they came out and they ripped the contract up, and we lost the deal, and we threatened to sue them, and the result of the whole thing was that we signed a first look with the director who we had sued in exchange for indemnifying them to go with Sony Classics, which was kind of amazing. But in the midst of that, for losing that deal, he like threw a cigarette, he threw it at me, and then he was like, I was going for the garbage can. I was going for the garbage can. But you know, like when you're in an abusive situation like that, you know, if I was healthier, I would have quit, right? Or I would have, but you're like, you know, you blame yourself. Like I deserved it. I lost the movie. I remember thinking that at the time, you know, I always thought that. I thought I deserved having a cigarette thrown at me because the people who lasted, you know, more than a few months at Miramax, all like, that was why I was at the therapist, right?
Yeah,
because
right.
It was my fault that he threw the cigarette at me. And there was, you know, he collected people who were kind of damaged. And I put myself in that category at that time anyway.
Well, so whatever, I guess I wonder, what was it that in 2000 made you decide I'm going to essentially go out on my own, start my place, Blumhouse. And I also wondered, because of what has become of it over these last 21 years, was there something, were you familiar with, let's say, I guess the closest thing to a precursor to what you have become maybe was Roger Corman? Was there some model in your mind of what you wanted this place to be? Low budget, high return kind of genre movies?
There was nothing. There was no mod. There was one thing. I want to be my own boss.
Yeah.
That was it.
Yeah.
You know, and when I look back at it, if I had to do my career over again, I should have stayed another 2 or 3 years actually at Miramax, despite what I said before. I know I'm contradicting myself, but I left. I could have used a couple more years of experience before I started my own company. I didn't start Blumhouse in 2000. I actually started a company called Blum Israel, which was a colossal failure. We produced 5 or 6 movies. They were all horrible except one.
Now, is that's Israel, not as in the nation, but the woman who brought you to Miramax, right?
That's Amy Israel. Yeah. Who is still a very close, great friend of mine. She got me the job at Miramax, and we left together. We started this company together. And the only person in the world I know who got the better end of Harvey when he was in power was my uncle Bernard Salek, who was a wealthy guy, lived in LA, and always kind of enamored with the movie business. And I pitched him endlessly I wanted an investor, and he put up $1 million and Harvey put up $1 million, and we started Blum Israel. And miraculously, my uncle Bernie got the $1 million back and Harvey lost $1 million. So I still give my uncle, he's the only guy who got the better of Harvey. Right. But the company was ill-fated from the very get-go. But it got me out of, my dad had his own business, and I just really wanted to have my own business. I really didn't want to work for anybody else. Beyond that, I had no idea what was going to happen.
So after those first, I think it's roughly like 7 years of being independent and sort of struggling in some sense, how do you wind up, you're involved, I believe you have this deal that you mentioned at Paramount, despite not having produced a studio movie before, and it was out of that era that you had the kind of career making first big giant hit. One is still one of the biggest hits financially ever. If you look at, I guess it cost 15,000, made 193 million. This is Paranormal Activity. How do you even get that through the studio system?
Well, a couple things, one thing is that's just kind of interesting for the story here is after 2 years at Blum Israel, I was going to go back to work for Harvey. I was going to run the Weinstein, be head of production at the Weinstein Company. And I had this moment you wait for your whole life in your career where Harvey and Brad Gray were like arguing. They had nothing to do with me. They were just competing with each other. I was the beneficiary and I wound up at Paramount. And that's not the answer to your question, but the answer to your question is like I said, I wish I was 32 or 33 before I started on my own. I was 30, but I was old enough to basically understand that the movie business specifically, as opposed to the television business, was specifically about two things. And to a certain degree, this is still true when you're younger anyway. It's about doing enough things to get a hit. There's no one on the planet except Pixar who can make hit movies over and over and over. And they're not even a person, they're a company. I don't know anyone, there's no one who has a perfect track record, producer, director, actor, anybody, right? Some people have better track records than others, but no one has perfect. So the way that you make a hit, some famous actor I forget said to my friend Ethan, told me, said, how do you win an Oscar? And the guy said to Ethan, you know how to win an Oscar? And Ethan said no. And the guy said, you make 100 movies, right? So I knew two things. I knew that you had to get a hit, and the way to get a hit was to keep making movies. And that's what I did. And Paranormal was like the 7th or 8th movie that I had done. Not be precious, not think you're a genius and spend 5 years developing something that one special thing, which opens and there's an earthquake and then the movie doesn't work anyway, even if it's great, right? So many factors factor into a hit beyond what any one person can control, that the only way to get a hit is to have multiple movies. One, that's 50%. The other half of the battle is what you do with the hit. And I was so lucky to have worked at Miramax at a time when we were hit makers. So we'd go to these film festivals, we'd buy a movie from a first or second time director, and we'd make them a star. They were immediately a star. They became bankable the minute we bought their movie, right? And 9 times, and the directors were always very young, in their 20s. And 9 times out of 10, the director would blow it. Most of those directors you've never heard of. And they would blow it because they would say, I made this comedy and it's a huge hit, and Miramax bought it and they gave me a 3-picture deal. My second movie is going to be a horror movie. Massive mistake. Massive mistake. The way to manage a hit, which is one of the hardest things to do, is when you have a hit, what the industry wants from you is another movie like the hit. So when we had Paranormal Activity, agents, people would say to me, like, now you got to make insert any big, you got to make, I forget the name of the movie I always use. You got to make a big, expensive action movie or a big, expensive horror movie. Yep. And I was 35 or 36 when Paranormal Activity happened. And I took away from Miramax, if I ever have a hit, I'm not going to fumble it. I'm not going to screw it up. So I immediately made Insidious, Sinister, The Purge, all low budget horror movies, exactly like the same model as Paranormal Activity. Eventually we branched out. Eventually we did Whiplash. Eventually we did Get Out. A Black Klansman. Eventually we did these other movies that weren't horror movies either at all or horror movie adjacent. But we never started doing that until we had like a ton of success.
So just to confirm though, your predisposition personally is not necessarily towards horror. It's just that horror financially makes the most sense in this business.
No, I don't think that's really accurate. I'm not like Tarantino or Eli Roth, where I grew up loving horror movies. That I didn't do. but like now I'm in a position where I don't need, if I didn't want to make horror movies anymore, I wouldn't make them. And it's still our core business. And the reason it's our core business is, though I wasn't a horror movie, I wasn't a horror movie fan specifically, my personality is totally similar to that of a horror fan. And when I finally met horror fans in the horror community from Paranormal Activity, I was finally like, I found my people. Like, this is what I want to do. Like, I was saying yesterday, I was like, as long as I make movies, I'm going to make horror movies. If I stop making horror movies, I'll have stopped making movies. You know, I love the filmmaking community in the horror world. And I love the fans in the horror world. And I've now, obvious, I couldn't keep doing what I'm doing if I didn't love horror movies. But you are right that when I made Paranormal, I wasn't, but I was like, just what I said. Like I saw so many people blow a hit, and I knew how to manage a hit, which is very complicated. And you get terrible advice. You know, agents and managers and lawyers still to this day, if a director has a hit movie that costs $5 million, they say your next movie should cost 15. It's the worst advice you can give someone, I think, the worst.
Well, and it's hard enough to follow a hit with under any circumstances, but particularly when, as I recall, Paramount was not wanting to necessarily share the credit when that happened, and that led to, I guess, to your going independent, and again, right, from or breaking from them, right?
Yeah, Paramount was horrible when we did Paranormal Activity. They were horrible. Brian Lord, who's represented me we've been friends, and he's been the great mentor of the company. He called Brad Gray the week after Paranormal Activity came out, and he said, are you going to call Jason Blum? I was the sole producer of the movie. And Brad Gray says, who's Jason Blum? That was very, very, Paramount was a studio in trouble.
Yeah.
And they had very little successes. And this movie was our deal was horrible. You know, Paramount made almost all the money on the movie and continues to. The deal on the Paranormal movies is Paramount makes everything and everyone else makes 5 cents.
Sorry.
And that it was so lucrative, it's so profitable that they did the opposite of thank the talent. They wanted to erase the talent. They wanted us gone because they just didn't want to give credit to anyone except to themselves. Now, I'm very grateful to them for that. At the time, it was extraordinarily difficult and I was furious, but I thank them because I was begging to stay at the company, and I never would have had the company that I had if I stayed, and they let me go, and I left.
And that's where Blumhouse really.
That's where we started.
Yeah,
that's where we started. Yeah.
I mean, part of the theme of this conversation is the way that the industry's changing and changed over recent years, and you've been at the forefront of that with Blumhouse, because I think as you know has been noted, a lot of people have tried to copy your model. It sounds easy enough to copy, but it's not, obviously, otherwise everybody would successfully do it. But I guess I just wonder how you have very specific criteria that you've established, I believe, from what I understand, where, you know, a budget will not go over a certain amount, unless there's X kind of talent that's associated, or it's one of a certain studio partner versus others. Like, can you just take us into your equation about whether or not to do a project? Because in that, and particularly with horror, because as you say, Paranormal Activity is 2007, but in the years since, you've had a number of other huge horror, you know, small budget horror hits that spawned franchises and all kinds of stuff. Insidious is 2011, The Purge is 2013, and many others. So just your equation, if you can share that to whatever extent you could share that.
Yeah, sure. It's not an equation. It's just, and by the way, it's incredibly challenged now. It sounds, and we operate differently now. The streamers have upended everything, and COVID really upended everything. But the philosophy is quite simple, which is all the talent, meaning us as the producers, the actors, the writer, the director, forgoes any kind of meaningful upfront compensation. And what I mean by that is we work with directors whose quotes are $1 million, or a writer whose quotes is $500,000, or actors who's made $3 million. And everyone, instead of making what they've made on their last movie, works for scale, or in our case, works for free, which keeps the budgets of the movie massively smaller. In exchange for working for scale, in exchange for foregoing their fee, they get two things: creative control. So the director has final cut. They have final say over casting. They have final say over so many, their department heads, like so much more than they ever get as a for hire, because I think it's immoral to tell someone to bet on yourself, but then you get to tell them what to do, right? So if you're going to tell someone bet on yourself, you got to let them bet on yourself. One of the reasons the model doesn't travel, no studio can do this. They can't, they all think they're too brilliant. They can't give control to directors like that, the kind of directors we give control to. That's one. And two, you give them a real fundamental interest in the movie. So if the movie's successful, they pay. And I'm a psychopath about that. Most of the people are compensated with box office bonuses, and so that there's no lawyer or accountant involved. If the movie makes $50 million, I get $100,000. It says it in my contract. Anyone can, your kid can understand it. Yes. And when our movies hit our box office levels, I take a film me at the FedEx thing, sending the checks. I send a film of me to the thing and I say, you hit 50 million, your $100,000 check is going to be tomorrow, and they get it tomorrow. News travels fast in Hollywood. So people are also, in a way that they're not willing to work for the studios because they don't do that. They take forever to pay and blah, blah, blah. So we've been able to get incredibly talented, very expensive people to buy into our model, because everyone, their agents and lawyers and accountants know that if they have a success, they're going to get paid fast. Those are the two fundamental tenets of the movie business side of our business. And we've only been talking about that, and that's fine. I'm happy to just talk about that, but just as an accurate picture of kind of my life, my life is kind of split 50-50 between movies, and the business is kind of 50-50 between movies and TV.
Well, so that is another thing that I think is, in terms of changing landscape of the industry. I mean, what is that, because there are now so many more partners in TV than they're used to for, places that need content? Or is that because you find that your content makes more sense on, or 50-50 sense to do it for TV as well? Like, why is TV used to be looked down upon by film people? Now seems to be the opposite. Why is that for you?
You asked a lot of questions, but let me answer the first question. The reason the business, the model that I just described is upended is because the model that the streamers have is the exact opposite. Mm-hmm. It's way more opposite than what a typical studio movie. So if I'm over here with, you get nothing, and if the movie's a hit, you get a lot. The studios have always been in kind of the middle, which is, we're going to pay you a bunch. We're going to pay you $1 million or $2 million, and we're going to pay you a good size fee up front. But if the movie's really successful, you'll get more. The streamers are over here. We're going to pay you super handsomely up front. But if 2 people see your movie, or 2 billion people see your movie, you don't get a penny more. Right. And that's there are good things about that, and there are bad things about that. But it is I philosophically, by the way, you can't beat them, join them. We're making streaming movies all the time, and we take our checks up front. So don't get me wrong. Right. But philosophically, I struggle with it, because it puts you immediately at odds with your end user. When I haven't been paid and I'm making a movie with Universal, I can tell them, hey, you got it. That's why I can give my director final cut. I say, hey guys, I'm not going to make money unless this thing makes money, right? So I'm going to fight for my creative vision. I'm going to fight for my ideas. If I've already been paid, and the studio that's financing my thing is spending $50 million on my movie, and they've already paid me and everyone else, I have no ground to stand on. And they have all the ground. They have all the moral authority. It's like, hey, producer, shush. You've been paid. Your director's been paid. You get paid no matter what this thing does. So you got to do what we want to do. They don't do that per se, but that could be just because I'm old and I'm used to doing it another way. But they've upended, my thinking about, a healthy creative process.
So just two or three more things from me, and then we're going to take questions from the audience. But I guess one thing that I find really fascinating about you and your career is that, prior to you, there was sort of horror people are put into one category, and then prestige movie people are generally, sometimes put into another. It's always been looked down upon in the industry by the Academy. I mean, you think about the greatest horror movies, they didn't win Oscars and all of that.
Yeah, like
And
Get
yet,
Out, which should have won. Get
well,
Out, and if you think I have a chip on my shoulder or I'm bitter about it, you are correct. Get Out should have won, and the movie
Right.
that did win the year Get Out won. I guarantee you, not one person on the Zoom remembers.
well, and
Anyone
so
named a movie that won the year Get Out should have won?
I think I can, but I agree. I get what
What is it?
what you're saying. Was it? It was Shape of Water that year.
That's it. Yeah,
Yeah.
Shape of Water, the real memorable movie, Shape of Water. All right, go on.
So my my question, I guess, is what is it? You don't have to do a movie like Whiplash, which I know you've said was theatrically sort of a frustrating. It's not an easy sell of a movie. All of that. You don't have to.
No. It's an easy sell. They sold it terribly.
Okay, so that was okay. Fair
They
enough.
sold it terribly. It was
Right.
an easy sell. It got nominated for 27 Academy Awards. It was an easy sell. They just didn't know how to sell it.
Well,
Made more in South Korea than the United States.
Oh, that's bad. That's bad.
But
Well,
go on.
So just to note some of your what we would call like quote unquote prestige productions, but also that blur that line between horror and more respectable fare. You've got Best Picture Oscar nominations for producing Whiplash in 2014, Get Out in 2017, Black Klansman in 2019, and then there are the 2 Emmy wins in the middle of that with The Normal Heart for HBO, the limited series, and The Jinx, the true crime docuseries for HBO. So what is it a personal desire to not be put in a box as just the horror guy, or what is it? Why do you branch out when you do things like that?
Well, the reason I love horror is because I'm really, the idea of prestige movies and the people who are like, we're doing this important, God's work, who are in the movie business. I bristle at that. I can't stand it. So that's why I love horror movies. Now, the advantage of having in my mind, what's the point of having a big successful production company with a lot of weight if you can't tell the stories that you want to tell? So I love doing horror. Like I said, I'll do horror forever. But if something comes into the office that I think all those movies are Blumhouse. Unlikely we're going to do a comedy, right? But I think there's a real darkness in Whiplash. There's clearly a darkness in, there's clearly, there's nothing more evil than the KKK in Black Klansman. And so I think those movies are certainly cousins to horror movies. They're not horror movies by any stretch, but if I like to look at Blumhouse as like dark genre, we did Roger Ailes, we did Loudest Voice in the Room. He's a bad guy. It wasn't a horror series, but he's a bad guy. Right. So they have to fit in that umbrella of dark genre or dark subject matter. But if they fit in that umbrella and I love it or someone else at the company loves it, we do it. What's the point otherwise? And
so is Get Out sort of the ideal scenario where it's a absolutely effective horror movie, but also really art, and it's you betting on a first time filmmaker director, right? It's you not spending a fortune, but I mean, I guess is that sort of the best experience with a movie, in terms of blurring the line between horror and art?
Did you say it's really art?
No,
you said that's not what you said, right?
I don't know. I don't remember what I said.
I hope you didn't say it's really art. That would be terrible. I'm only giving you a hard time because I think, in my mind, James Wan is no less artful than Jordan Peele. In my mind, the guy who did Insidious, people on this Zoom may disagree, but the guy who did Insidious in the second Insidious movie has as much talent as Jordan Peele, for sure. Is there a message in Get Out that is not an Insidious? for sure. Also, Insidious is a fun, scary movie. It doesn't have a lot to say about the world we live in. Get Out is a fun, scary movie that has a ton to say about the world that we live in. Is that the golden ticket for me? No. Was it super fun to do a horror movie that got nominated for Academy Awards? Absolutely. But going forward, are we only looking for horror movies that are about issues? No. We have a lot of them. The Purge is a horror movie. We've done 5 Purge movies. The Purge is about gun control in America. The Purge is by a guy who's got a kid, and everything that we all hear, every time there's a shooting, half the country thinks the answer to a shooting is more guns. There's a shooting in a school, and the answer is put a guard in the school with the gun. So the Purge is an absurdist idea of like, okay, there's so many killings. Let's make killing legal for 12 hours a year, right? Anyone can kill anyone, and it's legal 12 hours a year. In France, they got the satire of the Purge in Europe much, but in the US, sadly, half the audience is like, yay, the Purge is a great idea. In Europe, they got it. In Europe, the Purge is called America's Nightmare. America's Nightmare, 1, 2, 3, 4. We're about on our 5th one. Right. So countries that have a more rational relationship to guns understand the Purge a lot better. But that's a long answer to your question. It's great to do scary genre movies that have a message or a political message or something to say in them, but it's not exclusively what I'm interested in doing.
Last 1 minute from me is going to be before the audience is, do all Blumhouse films share anything in common? Is there any one?
The other thing about Get Out, and then I'll answer that too.
Yeah, sure.
The other thing about Get Out is to give you credit where you deserve is that it is, in my mind, the perfect Blumhouse movie, and that the budget was $4.5 million. We usually don't work with first-time directors, but I don't think it's fair to refer to Jordan Peele as a first-time director. He'd wrote, produced, directed, starred a television show for 5 years. He'd done hundreds of hours he'd spent hundreds of hours on set. So he really knew what he was doing. And it was a low budget, high concept movie. So it was a perfect Blumhouse movie. But now I forgot your question. I don't know how I got.
No, I was just basically the next thing was just, do you feel that regardless of genre, regardless of experience of director or anything, is there anything that you would say all Blumhouse films?
Oh yeah. I think that not all, but almost every movie of ours has some kind of edge. It's edgy. And I feel like, I wouldn't say this of all of them, but more than most other studios, I think our movies are original. And that's directly related to the cost. Because when you do stuff for low cost, you can take chances. And when you can take chances, we're more drawn to doing more original things, whether that's the casts, we'll use actors that people haven't seen before, or storytelling, stories that people aren't used to. So I feel like edgy and original, I hope. Edgy, original, and dark.
Well, and absolutely. And then I guess the frustration for people about a lot of the big studio stuff made by others is that for the very reason you've just described, there is such a disincentive to do original stuff. That's why we're seeing so many, adaptations of board games and video games and everything that seems for a lot of us a bit frustrating. So with that being said, what do you make when you see in the past week alone, this Discovery Warner Brothers merger, Amazon buying MGM, where there's fewer of these places that are actually going to go, fewer places that will be out there, and therefore maybe less incentive to do original stuff. How do you feel when you read the news this week?
Very, very clearly about it. I was talking to a class of kids this morning, students this morning, so slightly different audience, but they asked me the same question, and here's very clearly, for all of us as consumers, myself included, people who watch movies, go to the movies and watch TV, it's bad. Consolidation is bad. Consolidation means we're going to get less good things to watch. But I was saying to this class of film kids this morning, the positive side of it is there's much, much, much more opportunity for young people or anyone who's interested in getting into our business, because the amount of capital being spent on both movies and TV, there's never been anything close to what's been spent the last 2 or 3 years and what's going to be spent for the next 2 or 3 more years. Medium, long term, who knows?
Right.
But right now, the opportunity for young people is unparalleled. And that's a good thing. Maybe there's the next Scorsese or whoever that never would have gotten to make anything. And now that they will. So I think it's a double-edged sword. I think there are things about it that are bad and things about it that are good.
So I want to ask people to start submitting if they have a handful of questions to put in the chat. But my final question, though, for you, Jason, is, we've seen what the pandemic has done to movie theaters. We've seen the sorts of movies that were getting theatrical releases as opposed to going to TV to begin with. With Blumhouse Productions, how long do you believe that there will always be a place in theaters for them, or do you expect that 5-10 years from now, most movies that are not giant, huge budget tentpole movies will have to primarily go through the smaller screen?
I don't, I have everyone has a different point of view about this. My point of view is that there'll actually be much more choice in theaters, but the choice will last for a much shorter time. So you'll have many different kinds of movies playing in theaters, but they'll only last a week. You'll only have a week to see them. And I don't think the theatrical experience is going away as much as I don't think movies made Broadway go away. It's just not. I think people like to gather. You can't compare the experience of sitting in a dark room full of 300 people watching something on a 40-foot screen with your best home entertainment system. There are different experiences. So I don't think it's going to go away, but I do think it will be fundamentally different forever post-COVID than it's ever been before.
Yeah. All right. We're going to take a handful of questions here. Samuel Dueck would like to ask you, besides content, what else would give an advantage to a streaming platform in the future? I guess in terms of if you were negotiating with your content, what would make you go with a streaming service? I believe that's what the question is.
Why would we go with a streaming service on one of our projects?
Yeah.
Look, the funny thing about the model that I described of the streaming service is, if you have something you're not sure about commercially, if it's slightly offbeat, go to a streamer. Because if you're not sure about it, and you go theatrical and it doesn't work, not only does it hurt your checkbook, it hurts your career. So you don't, as a producer, it's bad. As a director, it's worse. If you release a movie in a movie theater and it doesn't make money, it's bad for everyone. For everyone's future, it's bad. If you release a movie on streaming and 2 people see it, it doesn't matter at all.
Right. You got
so if you have something that's a surefire hit, go theatrical. If you're a little worried about it or it's offbeat, go to streamers.
Right. So we have
also, by the way, that relates to the budget. If something is really expensive, go to stream. You're very unlikely to recoup through the theatrical system. If something the streamer pays you, the more expensive the thing is, the more you get paid, which if you think about it is crazy. So they're encouraging producers to bring them expensive material because your pay is a percentage of the budget. So there's no reward to bring a streamer. So if you have something very inexpensive, you shouldn't bring it to a streamer.
And of the major and of the now huge exploding number of screeners, I guess this is sort of a follow-up, but is there any, from your point of view, dealing with Netflix, Amazon, Disney, Apple, whatever, is there a huge difference in your mind between the places, or I guess that's essentially what he said is his follow-up here.
Well, no, there's a huge between streamers, you mean? Yeah. Massive difference between streamers. Netflix is in the content business. That's it. They only make TV shows and movies. So if you have something edgy, they're not worried about we're not gonna be able to sell a phone. Apple is so obviously the content business is 1/100% of their business. So they're not going to take risks with their movie. They don't want controversy that, oh my God, Apple made this, I'm going to stop buying the phone. So it makes them much more conservative. I think Amazon is probably in the middle of those. Amazon still, their core business is not entertainment, although they seem to, because they sell everything. They sell guns, they sell everything. They're a little more loose when it comes to what the content can be. But absolutely, the streamers are all very, very different in what they are attracted to, why they do it, and all that sort of stuff. Very, very different. Disney, you don't need to explain, right?
Right. Here's one from Saskia Cohen. What advice do you have for an aspiring producer? Would getting a law degree or MBA be helpful
I just want to interrupt to say my name is pronounced Saskia. Sauce like tomato sauce, Kia like the car.
Thank
I'm
you.
used to you know, introducing my name.
Thank you.
I would say it's helpful, but not essential. You know, I would say if you have the opportunity and it's something you're interested in, but don't go to law school to be a producer. That would be a mistake. But if you're interested in the law and interested in producing, for sure. Same thing with an MBA.
Yeah. Do we have a final question from somebody? Please jump in now if you have one you'd like to ask. Give it a couple seconds here.
I have another question. I don't know if anyone else does, but
Go for it.
thank you. So I was wondering, when it comes to pitching ideas, do you always accept pitches from people who have representation, or do you ever accept pitches from people who don't have representation?
We don't. We only take pitches from people who have representation, unfortunately.
All right. Well, unless somebody goes very quickly, here we go.
Does
Last question.
streaming give an opportunity to to films with NC-17 content?
Say that again.
Does streaming provide an opportunity for more NC-17 content?
That is a spectacular question. I would highly, do you know, are there NC-17 films on Netflix? I would highly doubt. I would be shocked if there are NC-17 films.
365 was one of their, I think, top 3 grossing films in 2021.
Which one?
At 365, I think it was called.
And was that NC-17?
I don't know what it was rated, but it was certainly more nudity and more sexually explicit than the vast majority of R-rated movies that I've ever seen in a theater.
I would be shocked if anyone but Netflix did NC-17, maybe NC-17, but I would be shocked if anyone else did. Shocked.
Okay, really quickly, Mark Pariser, does Blumhouse buy finished films?
Does Blumhouse buy what?
Finished films?
Yeah, we did. Hey, I always said it's much easier to produce a finished movie. We buy movies in post. We did that with The Visit. We did that with Unfriended, and we did that with Paranormal Activity. So we definitely look at finished films and maybe we'll make some editorial changes. Maybe we won't even have to, even better, but we look at finished films all the time.
And lastly, from Corey Goldstein, are you going to get more involved in interactive at all? Gaming, VR, do you see those merging more with the world of film?
I've been trying to do, I tried to do VR and gave up after 2 years. It was a failed attempt. We're working on gaming, but we haven't gotten anywhere with it, but I'm working on it.
All right. Well, Jason, can't thank you enough for doing this. I really appreciate your time. And I know everybody else here does as well. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me. Nice to talk to you. Thank you, Katie. Thank you, Scott. Thank you, everybody. And so long.
Thank you so much. Everyone, hope to see you in person at some point soon. And Jason will let Roxy get her dad back.
Bye, guys.
See you later.